It is the Last Minute Blues podcast, joined in studio by Alex Ferrario from 101 ESPN and from The Athletic, Mr. Jeremy Rutherford. Gentlemen, I just want to let you know that Monday I had a tooth removed, and today is the first day, the first trial run with my temporary until I get the real deal in
How's
in
it
3
feel?
months. It feels great.
Speaking from somebody who just has a load of fake teeth on the bottom left side, welcome to the club.
Let me tell you something, all right? So, unfortunately, this is the second time that I've had to get a tooth pulled. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to have to hop through this because we got to talk about the Blues. But when I, about 2 years ago, went to get a tooth removed, I wanted to, quote-unquote, save some money. So I decided that instead of having them put me out, that I would just, just have them numb me and then do-do-do-do-do.
No, I mean, I understand why you did it because it costs an arm and a leg, but
That was the dumbest decision that I have ever made in my life. And also, too, it's the only time that I believe that I've ever had a doctor mad at me because it took so many of those numbing shots to get to me to where they could do it that guy was totally getting frustrated.
Yeah.
So this particular time, boom, boom, out. But I'll tell you what, that guy has got to have the hands of a friggin' magician because it is not hurt since Monday evening when, 12 hours after.
clip this whole thing off.
Yeah.
I'm not taking any pain meds whatsoever. I feel pretty friggin' good, all things considered. So, man, it worked out.
Okay, the only thing there is it's not the first time a doctor has been mad at you. The colonoscopy doctor.
That's true.
Yeah, I honestly, and
Me too. Hey, me too.
Hey, no, this is a real thing. I have not had a colonoscopy yet, and I am actually getting ready to make my very first appointment because I know that I should have had this done already. And I'm being serious here, guys. This is nothing that we can screw around
No,
with.
I've had 4 of them.
You've had 4 of them already?
Because I've had, since I was like 13 or 14 years old, I've had like
Couple years
IBS. Yeah, I've like irritable
okay.
bowel syndrome. And they thought, it's interesting because I know Jeff suffered from this.
Yeah.
They thought I had Crohn's disease. Like they were worried. And so I had one colonoscopy the first time when I was like 15, I think. They wanted to make sure and like everything was good. Then the second one I had, I bleeped up because I wasn't supposed to eat food before. And like the doctors, I make the argument that the doctors told me I could eat some food. And then I got there and they were like, yeah, we can't do this. So I screwed that one up. But then I've had 2 more, like every 4 or 5 years, they have me come in and look at it because of the IBS.
Yeah.
And I've had polyps in there. So yeah, I've been through this a few times.
I'm at the point. My dad, what was it? A couple of weeks ago, we were over at my folks' house, and my dad and I are just kind of talking. I was asking kind of about how he was doing that whole thing, and he was like, "Hey," he's like, "Have you had a colonoscopy yet?" And I said, "No," and he was like, "Son, stop screwing around. You have way too many people depending on you, the whole thing."
Oh, yeah.
And so I absolutely have to. And honestly, the reason that I hadn't is simply just scared.
Really?
Like seriously, just not looking forward to it. But long story short, take care of yourselves, fellas.
Have to.
Take
Get the
care of
colonoscopy.
yourselves.
Yep.
Seriously. All right, so
And
we have.
don't take the pain meds when you get your teeth pulled.
Well, no, if you need to.
No, power through like Donnie.
Okay, well, but if I would have needed to,
Save
I would have taken them.
$45.
Listen, guys, I want to start with one thing here real quick to my Blues fans. I just want to talk to you really quickly. I understand that right now things are less than ideal. I understand that we have a lot of question marks and we have a lot of things that are making us feel uneasy about our Blues, okay? I just want to speak to you from a fan perspective for 30 seconds. Blues fans, you have won one, okay? I don't think that you appreciate how awesome it is that you have won one. I don't care if the Blues don't win the rest of my life. At least I can go back to 2019 and say that they have won one. And that you don't have this feeling at the end of every single one of your seasons like I do with my Buffalo Bills of complete gosh dang heartache and heartbreak. You've got one. Things are not perfect. I have a ton of questions that I'm about to ask these guys. I'm a little unsure about some things, but at least I can go back to 2019 and that picture in my mind of Ryan O'Reilly and Pat Maroon on the plane with the friggin' with the MVP trophy or whatever on O'Reilly's lap. Just appreciate that you got one. That's all I want to say. I know it's not easy right now, but dear Lord, baby Jesus, the other side of things is absolutely no fun at all. At all.
You couldn't have picked a better time to do the podcast from what you went through, talking about that with what the Blues are going through now. Yeah, Donnie's right there.
So this week has been a clunker for the Blues, at least the last week and a half, really. And, I mean, we were kind of leading into that in the podcast last week. It was up, it was down. There was no real momentum being gained by these guys. And so this week, you start to see some changes being made. Scott Perunovich gets traded to the Islanders. Yesterday, Brandon Saad put on waivers. If he passes through, he's going to go to the minors. So, guys, let's really just kind of Doug Armstrong had the big press conference yesterday, talking about all of these moves. So I don't know the most logical place to start, but, I think the first thing that I think of at this point is we're not going to make the playoffs, and I think that we probably need to start shifting to what
the team's
and what the plan is going forward with playoffs not in the picture.
Well, I mean, start with the moves. I mean, Scott Perunovich gets traded. That one, I don't really think has anything to do with where the Blues are at in their struggles, at least from my perspective. That felt like it was a long time coming, and they were looking to see, and I think Doug said it in the press conference yesterday, you try and get the best return possible for your team. And for Scott Perunovich, you're not playing. There's not a whole lot out there. And then lo and behold, the Islanders get hit with multiple injuries. They got to go get Tony DeAngelo from the KHL. They're desperate. They need help. And so rather than putting them through waivers and losing them for nothing, you got a conditional pick. Now, I think he has to play 20-plus games with the Islanders, right, JR? And if he doesn't, then they get nothing. It's future considerations for Scott Perunovich.
Yeah, you got the conditions on that for that fifth-round pick. And, neither here nor there in terms of, what could happen with Perunovich. Got off to a good start, by the way, with the Islanders.
I think he had an assist last night, 2 shots, finished as the +2, and I expected him to play well for New York. He played well when he was playing here.
Yeah, and so he goes on, and he's going to get that chance to play maybe for at least a couple weeks, right? And then if the Islanders get some guys back, then you never know what's going to happen. But if he impresses, and listen, there's a lot of Blues fans who think he could go somewhere and play well, and then maybe there's egg on the face of the Blues. But I think if you're the Blues, you had to come to that conclusion that perhaps it wasn't going to work here. Listen, if the coach isn't going to play you,
right?
If they're bringing guys in, it's a telltale sign, not much of a future here, and that's what Doug Armstrong said yesterday.
Well, and Jim Montgomery said it too. Like, we got Cam Fowler. Cam Fowler is running our power play. He's playing top 4 minutes. There just wasn't an opportunity. They did the same with P.O. Joseph. He wasn't playing, and so they said, well, let's send him elsewhere. So that one felt like it was going to come at some point. It was just a matter of waiting for somebody to offer something up.
I honestly don't understand what Blues fans would be upset with here. I mean,
Jake Wallman and Vince Dunn.
Okay, well, I understand that, but those guys weren't getting tremendous minutes here anyway. I don't know that either one of those guys were a good fit here. They go somewhere where they have much more opportunity, a better chance.
And a kick in the pants because it didn't work out at their first spot.
Yeah,
There's so many variables that come into that. Everybody thinks that Bobby Orr just drops in Seattle or drops in Detroit, and that's not the situation.
I mean, it's not as though, and I hope Scott Perunovich goes to the Isle or goes wherever and has success, but it's not because Homeboy didn't get a chance.
Right.
I mean, they really tried several different ways to work that guy in. Sometimes, man, it just doesn't work out. So then let's bring us to the veteran, all right? Brandon Saad, put on waivers. Now, I don't know that it's necessarily technically a surprise because you saw him spending some games in the press box. It was obvious that, maybe he might not be a Montgomery sort of guy, but still, guys, he's a Stanley Cup winner. He's in the middle of a deal. Were you guys at all surprised to see this and talk about Saad being put on waivers and kind of how you think that this is going to play out from here?
Alex, I don't think surprised that they're moving on from him, but like Donnie says, maybe a little bit surprised that it was waivers because if you go back to last year and he had a pretty decent year, you think, okay, well, if you do move on from Saad, maybe a second-round, third-round draft pick that you're going to get back in return, but as Doug Armstrong alluded to yesterday, guys, we don't not try to make moves.
Right.
So he tried to move Brandon Saad, no takers. And the biggest thing, he's got that extra year on the contract, 4.5. That's the one thing that sometimes I think we forget about when these deals are given out. You sign a guy in free agency or you make a trade and sign a guy. Do you give him that 4th year? Do you give him that 5th year? Well, guess what? If Brandon Saad had one last year on his deal, you're probably moving him for
if this was his final year.
But he's got that extra year, $4.5 million. So the Blues have no choice, but if they want to get rid of him, to put him on waivers and now hope that a team will take him and take that 4.5 next year off the books.
Well, and that's a great point because look at all the negotiations that the Blues fans have seen Doug Armstrong go through whether it was David Backus when he left because he wanted that extra year that Boston was willing to give him, whether it was Ryan O'Reilly, he wanted that extra year that Nashville was willing to give him. This is the other side of the coin. This is what it looks like when you do give them that extra year and it doesn't go well. And you're like, man, what do we do in this circumstance? And this is what had to happen. The part that I found so fascinating was this was the move, at least in my opinion, by Doug Armstrong that was kind of sounding the alarm bells to the team of like, this isn't going to look pretty if this continues this way. I mean, like you put a guy through waivers that was still a veteran. I mean, Braden Shen even said like the guy could still play. It just wasn't working right here. And they're doing that so that an Alex Texier can get a look in the lineup. Like this isn't like we've got a all-star sitting on the bench that needs to get into the lineup. This is a young guy that's also been in and out of the lineup a lot this season.
Super inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean, even Jim Montgomery said it yesterday. It's like, look, he was great for us. He got hurt or you got injured, you got sick. He returned, and it's just been inconsistent, just like the entire team has been. So that's the part that it was like, okay, this was 3 years ago when the Blues started off and they had that 8-game losing streak and Doug Armstrong held kind of a State of the Union to say everything was fine and things weren't fine. This was back in the 2018-2019 season when they fired Mike Yeo, Craig Berube took over, and Doug Armstrong was like, look, I'm not going to keep doing this firing coaches. This is on the players now. I felt like this Brandon Saad was the start of those kind of moments for the Blues this year.
Okay, so then a couple of follow-ups here really quickly. And I know that it's really tough to talk about players in a situation like this, all right? But, I mean, the reality of the situation is, guys, is there a player or two or three on the radar that you go, I would not be surprised if conversations were being had about this player right now. But first and foremost, are there other guys that should be worried?
Yeah,
I guess everybody's worried, but I mean,
guys that could get traded by the deadline.
Is there somebody on the cusp there that could be close? Yes.
So I'm glad that you said that, Alex, that, Doug was kind of talking about the focus on the players, because that's the angle I decided to take with my article today for this reason. The past couple times Doug has had these State of the Unions or, talk after a coach has been fired, it's been, you know what, Craig was a good coach for us. It was a good run. It's time to move on. We really need to get more out of these players. So he did talk about the players, but the headline was the coach getting fired, right? Okay, so then Drew Bannister comes in, and then we go through that situation, and then he gets let go, and it's the coach isn't the excuse anymore. Again, the coach, right? So yesterday was the first time where I feel, anyway, like Doug came out and said, there's been the same group of players, and we've had different head coaches, and we've brought in different supportive players,
Yep.
and the record's the same. And so now we need to chip away further and further at that. So, Donnie, I'm going back to your point.
Yeah.
Brandon Saad might be the first. And then who's next? I'm going to touch on that in an article, probably tomorrow. But my answer is this. What can you do? And we can all three talk about it. What can you do? Like, let's go through the names here. Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, are you keeping those guys? It's fine. Buchnevich, he's starting a 6-year contract. Jake Neighbors, I think he's a guy you can build around. Like, I really think he needs to be a part of this thing. Bottom 6 guys, okay, even if you want to move some of these guys, Texier, Joseph, Toropchenko, like, what are they doing for you in return? And then you get to the D, and I'll do this, with Parayko, not moving him. Fowler, he's good for this team at this point in time. Nobody's expecting him to be a guy, he was here in 3 or 4 years. And Suter's going to be gone, maybe next year. So you look at that situation, and there aren't many guys that you can say, okay, he's likely going to be gone. Maybe a Justin Falk, right, Alex?
Right, yeah. I mean, you got the pending UFAs, but I don't know, that's not doing anything. Like JR just referenced, like Radek Fox is a pending UFA. Sure, you can move that, but you're just putting somebody into a third and fourth line role.
Sundquist, like what's it?
Sundquist is in that spot for you. I mean, you go on the defensive side. JR mentioned Ryan Suter. Like, those guys aren't going to shift anything. Those were the complementary pieces that Doug brought in to try and push this team a little bit closer towards making the playoffs. It comes down to their top players, and even Doug Armstrong said that. Now, I don't think you're going to see any of that happen in season. Those don't take place. That's why I felt like the Brandon Saad was kind of a warning shot to the players of like, look, we can't keep doing this. There's an issue right now of being ready to perform in games. There's an issue of having the energy for a full 60 minutes. There's an issue of being aggressive in the offensive zone. And these are the same underlying factors that they talked about under Drew Bannister, under Craig Berube. Like, that's where this has been for the last 3 or 4 years. So I felt like when Doug basically said, it's been the same group. You look at your best players. Your best players have to be your best players on a nightly basis, and those are the ones that are underperforming.
All right, so first of all, when you just ticked through those things and I rolled my eyes at you,
I didn't appreciate that.
No, it's not you. It's the fact that we have been sitting here banging that goddamn drum for the last 2 years.
Right.
It's the same-ish. It's the same. You wrote about it in your article. How in the hell are we at this point in the goddamn hockey season and we have to hope that they're going to come out with jump? We're going to hope that they have to come out locked in. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so I want to throw this out there, and I am not saying that this is what they should do. This is probably an irresponsible sort of thing. But, guys, does this team need an absolutely nuclear-like shakeup? Does it need a Jordan Kyrou getting traded for another big piece? Does there need to be some kind of shock to the system for this team? Because it just seems like even if they played better Friday night against Colorado, I don't think it's not gonna go past that game. So I mean, does this team need a big old shock?
Like would it help? It could. And would it be the way for the Blues to return to being competitive and being a cup contender in a few years? It depends what kind of deal you're talking about.
And again, I'm not even saying it's right.
And
I'm just wondering.
And I'm not saying that you're saying let's do it. All I'm saying is this. I think patience is the key right here.
Okay.
And I know that's going to sound crazy to people who are going, well, just what Donnie said. That's what I think. You're like, we're waiting and waiting and waiting. But in order to change the complexion of this team, it's going to take time. And that's why I use the word patience, because, there's contracts on the books. Would Doug like to move 4 guys off the roster today? Yes, but he can't.
Right.
And listen, I'm with people who are going, yeah, it's his problem that he created by bringing these players in and giving them those long-term contracts. So when you look at the situation that it is, you just have to realize that, okay, yesterday it was Saad. In a couple weeks, it might be this guy. I agree with Alex that probably not trade deadline type trades. These are probably like summer type moves.
Yeah.
You're going to see this roster evolve over the next year or two, and at the same time, you're going to see the Snuggeruds and Dvorskys and Theo Lindsteins and Otto Stenbergs come in, and that's going to take some time too.
Right.
But you can't just, once you're in the situation that the Blues were in because of the contracts and because of the poor play, you can't change these things like that. And you, in the meantime, have to rely on the Robert Thomases and Pavel Buchneviches and Jordan Kyrous and these guys to keep you competitive. And if they're not, the whole thing looks out of whack. And then people want to, rush to do something when that's not the thing to do.
We took mic drops yesterday on our show after all of this came out, and we had one caller basically say, like, you need to ship all of these guys out. Thomas, Kyrou, Buchnevich, they've been here. Go get different guys to put them in different spots so that they can bring the culture in. Man, that's not as easy as you think it is. Like, unfortunately, this isn't a video game where you can trade one guy and force the trade to bring in another all-star and say, here we go.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are feeling this way because you just saw Mikko Rantanen get traded from Colorado.
And honestly, that's what had it on the top of my mind.
You
just
see
being
Mikko,
truthful.
right. You see Mikko Rantanen, and people are like, oh, my God, well, you could trade Robert Thomas to go get Mikko Rantanen. That's fine and dandy, but you're still going to be in the same spot to where you're bringing somebody in who's got to embrace the culture that the Blues are trying to set with their players. And right now, the problem isn't talent. You've got all of the talent. The problem is embracing the style that needs to be played to win. And that's, to me, I thought the biggest quote from Doug Armstrong yesterday was when JR asked him, so what can you do? And Armstrong's response was, observe.
Observe. That's it.
Him basically saying, like, I'm going to sit up top with Alexander Steen. I'm going to observe. Think of the inner circle that he has of Ken Hitchcock, Scott Mellenby, Al McKennis, Keith Kachuk, Pete Chiarelli. I'm going to observe. And that's why it was kind of like when your dad or mom were like, I'm going to keep an eye. It's like, oh,
Right,
shoot.
Right. It's worse than them actually yelling at you.
Yeah, I personally think they brought Jim Montgomery in because Doug Armstrong says this guy can coach a team to a Stanley Cup final. And now I don't have to worry about that variable anymore. unfortunately, and no disrespect to Drew Bannister, I felt like that was still a variable for the team. Team's not performing. Well, do we have the right coach? You got the right coach. Guy's got a 600 winning percentage in the NHL. He's in place. Now, I'm going to watch. I'm going to watch for the final 31 games of this season. And if there's issues of this, if this team's picking in the top 10 again, there's a top player problem. And that's when it really feels like they'll look at this and say, hey, this isn't working right now. We have to make some type of big change. You remember that 18-19 Cup season before they went on that run? Elliot Friedman had reported it that basically Doug Armstrong was calling the National Hockey League saying like, hey, we've got this underperforming player. We've got this underperforming player. They were ready to fire sale that thing. So if he was going to do it with that team, if this team can't respond to Brandon Saad being put on waivers, 3 coaching changes, and a team that basically had the month of January to be in the playoff conversation and have your own destiny in front of you, you let that slip away. That's where the observing's coming in.
And real quick, that's why we just saw the 2 moves that we saw, because those are the ones the Blues could make, right? That's the ones they could make. And I agree with Alex. Scott Perunovich had nothing to do with kind of the issues that are plaguing the Blues right now, but you could move them. And so they're moving on. Same with Brandon Saad. That was the move that you could make. If you could trade this guy or that guy or this guy on the list of players that the Blues brass is talking about upstairs, they would have done it yesterday.
Right. Okay. As we sit here, though, and we talk about this and we chop up all of this, I think about all of the podcasts that we have had before, and I think about all of the things in which that you guys have said, about this being a process and it being a slow go and those kinds of things. So my question, and I already know the answer to this, but are you guys even surprised that we're here? And, I just kind of got super concerned, and then kind of you guys talked me back into maybe not being as super concerned as far as being patient with everything, but like, Jeremy, I feel like with everything that I've listened and read from you over the course of the last year or so, that this kind of maybe feels like where this team even should be at this time, even though it's not ideal, but kind of feel like where we should be in the process. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and this is so crazy that you bring this up, because as I drive to the station and I think about, hey, what are we going to talk about? I have this unbelievable point, and I was looking for an opportunity to make it, and you just set me up for it.
All right, great.
No, I'm just,
I feel like I'm playing T-ball right now. Donnie just said it right there, and you're like,
Why do I do this to myself? Then I tell you guys it's going to be an unbelievable point. It doesn't hit,
and then Donnie does like 3 blank blinks, and like, that was your point?
That's what he was thinking about. But here, okay, so listen. So your question is, isn't this about where I thought they'd be more competitive and up in the wild card mix a little bit more than they are right now. Like we talked about, some guys not producing, and here we are. But here's the one thing that I just can't factor in 2025, and especially with this Blues team, with the fabric that these players have had, throughout the history, right? The Plaguers, all these guys. When you look at a team and you say to yourself, okay, they just lost a game to a Columbus, they're going to come back, right, the next game and, like, show that who they are. And they're going to go all out. And they might not win the game, but they're going to leave it all out on the ice. And then nothing. And then you win 2 games over Calgary, and you're going to Utah, and the whole city's talking about how big of a game this is. And you have maybe your worst period of the season, and your 2 top players get benched. Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
So my question is, are they where we thought they were? I thought they'd be a little better. And the reason I thought they'd be better is because I thought there would be more want to in those situations.
That's where I'm at too. Like I thought this team was going to be competing for a playoff spot. The Western Conference has played out exactly like I thought it was going to. I didn't think Nashville was going to be very good. I didn't think Utah was going to be this next big thing in the Western Conference. I thought it was going to be the Blues. I thought it was going to be a couple of these other teams that are fighting the wild card. And that's where the Blues are at. And I remember at the end, the exit interviews last year, and specifically I remember Robert Thomas, because he made the comment of, like, yeah, it's getting frustrating. I'm getting sick of missing the playoffs. Because think about it. Robert Thomas was in the playoffs his entire junior career, gets to the Blues, wins the Stanley Cup, the next 2 seasons in the playoffs. But if you're getting sick of missing the playoffs, I didn't see that in January. And I understand, like, the lulls of a season are for real. Joey talks about it all the time on the broadcast. Like, January sucks. Like, you just try and get to that all-star break, and then you get to playoff mode. But we're not just talking about January. You're also talking about October.
Yeah, man.
You're talking about November. December was the best month that we have seen the Blues, and it's no coincidence that's when Jim Montgomery took over, and Robert Thomas was the third best player in the National Hockey League. So as much gripe as we're giving Robert Thomas right now, you also have to identify how good he was in the month of December.
Right.
He was the third best player in the National Hockey League. Points, goals, plus minus. But what happened in January? Because I heard every single player for those 2 Calgary games that they backed it up. They said this is important. These are must wins. They made Calgary look like the inferior opponent. But then I heard Utah. This is a must win for us.
Yeah.
And like Jared just mentioned, your best players got benched for the final 9 minutes. And then from there, if not for a Vegas bounce that was essentially Jack Eichel not putting the puck in the back of the net, you're talking about 5 straight losses. So that to me is what really surprised me. Did I think this team was going to go on a run? Absolutely not. Did I think this team was going to win a round? Probably not. Although I put faith in Jordan Binnington, I did not think this team was going to fall into the conversation of another top 5 pick. And that's the part that it's like, whoa, because, I mean, Kyrou, Thomas, Buchnevich, you went out there and you got Holloway, Broberg. I mean, Colton Parayko is having a career year right now. And we're talking about where this team is at. That's the concern.
Man, it's just really disheartening. This just feels like broken record kind of stuff.
And that's why, Donnie, why you asked the question, is there going to be a nuclear move? I don't know if it's going to be a nuclear move, but you can't keep doing this for 3 years.
And that's why Doug Armstrong says it every time he talks about the retool versus the rebuild. Look at the conversation we're having, and, fans are having this conversation probably times 10,000.
I was going to say worse, actually.
Okay, so this is just 2.5, 3 years. Imagine 6, 7 years of the conversation we're having.
And remember,
that's what a rebuild is.
When Doug Armstrong talked about this window, gave it 3 years like the LA Kings. And that was 3 years ago. And the hope for him, if you're going down that LA Kings path, was that third year, you get to the playoffs. That's why I really feel like this has become it's time to observe. Because I think you're starting to look at this. Steen's taking over after next season. You've got contracts on the book. It's like, whoa. Because there still isn't out. Like, there still isn't out. Now, you have to be able – there's got to be 2 to tango in this. You've got – all of these no-trade clauses don't kick in until July 1st.
And I want to make one more point before I slip out, because we've talked about that a couple times. Observe. When people hear that word observe, please don't think that Doug Armstrong has no – handle on who's playing well, who's not, who he wants to move, who he doesn't, and he's got to observe further to kind of figure this out. This goes back to he can't do anything big right now.
Right.
And he's going to watch, and obviously the players know he's watching, and then he'll make the moves when he can. So, quote unquote, he's observing. No, quote unquote, he's trying to figure out behind the scenes what's possible.
And he's also observing the National Hockey League because he didn't realize Broberg and Holloway were going to be available this past offseason. That's the observing that Doug does. Doug observes the National Hockey League rather than just observing my team.
One thing real quick before we go. Is Sidney Crosby really going to get traded before the trade deadline?
I say no.
I don't believe it.
I say no.
I just can't see that guy in another sweater. That would just be so weird to me.
I think it looks bad now because they're like selling the team, but it's like a minority. So, like, I know Paul Bissonnette has been harping on this for a long time. I don't buy it. Pittsburgh's you can't move Sidney Crosby if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins.
I hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely so. Yeah. Gentlemen, it was wonderful to see your faces, and hopefully next time that we talk, maybe we'll have something fun to talk about.
Maybe like a 3-game win streak.
It would be nice. Alex Ferrario from 101 ESPN, Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic. I'm Donnie Fandango from 105.7 The Point. For our homeboy Jeff Burton, thank you as always for listening to the Last Minute Blues podcast, and let's go Blues!